It's hard to empathize with a murderer, but perhaps after hearing this story you might think differently. He made a terrible mistake, taking the life of his best friend, and paid the price with 12 years in prison. But that was not the end. One day, he was fatally stabbed and died. Him for the rest of his life. Who is this murderer and what happened to him? Keep listening, because this could very well be the most unbelievable story you've ever heard. This is his story. Hello, Eternal Bible Stories. I am writing this letter to share my experience of death with you. Before I begin, I want to give you 2 warnings. First, I have shared my story before, years ago. Maybe some of you have already heard it, but unfortunately it seems to have been forgotten, buried beneath the countless other stories out there. So, I am telling it again, hoping it reaches more people this time. And second, this story is not beautiful. It is not comforting or pleasant. What Maybe we should not have been playing around with my father's gun. Maybe we were 194 to the place that would be my home for the next 12 years. Until that moment, I had held on to some naive hope that maybe prison would not be as bad as I had imagined. Maybe, just maybe, I could keep my head down, serve my time, and get out in one piece. But from the moment I stepped off that prison transport bus and walked through the steel gates of Indian Creek Correctional Facility, I knew this was not a place where survival was guaranteed. At the time, Indian Creek was one of the most modern prisons in the country. The walls were new, the security system state-of-the-art. But inside, it was the same as every other prison in America, divided by, ruled by unwritten laws that were enforced. The moment you stepped into, the rule was simple. Whites stayed with whites, blacks with blacks, Latinos with Latinos. Segregated places in America. Out there, people pretend that racism is dying, but here it is about survival. Sticking to your own kind meant protection. Breaking that rule, it meant you were on your own, vulnerable, a walking target. It was not strictly enforced in county jail. There, things were more relaxed because no one stayed long enough for politics to take hold. But in here, where lifers and hardened criminals ran the system, that rule was absolute. I wanted nothing to do with any of it. I had never been a part of any gang, had never cared about race, and I did not want to start now. I thought if I just minded my own business, I could stay out of the mess. But prison does not work that way. You do not get to make your own rules. The first time I broke that unspoken law, it was purely by accident. I had been in county jail with a guy named Reggie, a black man who, like me, was just trying to get through his time without trouble. We had gotten along well enough, and when I ran into him again in Indian Creek, I did not think twice before greeting him. Just a simple, friendly, "What's up, man?" The moment the words left my mouth, I felt the weight of a dozen stares drilling into my back. I turned and saw a group of white inmates watching me from across the yard. Cold, unreadable expressions on their faces. Later that day, one of the older inmates pulled me aside. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he asked, his voice low, sharp. I barely had time to answer before he shook his head. "You're new, so I'll explain it once. You do not talk to them. You do not sit with them. You do not even look at them too long. You understand me?" I wanted to argue, to say that it was all ridiculous, but I knew better, not saying anything. I nodded. "Yeah, I got it." But even though I nodded, I did not truly understand what I had just stepped into. Not yet, because in prison, breaking the rules does not just make you a target. It makes you an enemy, and I had just painted a bullseye on my back. I knew I had been put on their radar, but this time it was not just by ordinary criminals. I had caught the attention of the one man in this prison that no one wanted to cross, Big Dog. He was the leader of the Aryan Brotherhood faction in this prison, a man who held more power than even the prison guards. He was serving 3 consecutive life sentences for murder. A man like that had nothing left to lose. He ruled his territory with fists, blades, and fear. If he called you down, it meant one of 2 things. Either you were given a task, or you were being judged. That morning, while I was standing in line for my meal, an inmate approached me without a word, simply tapping my shoulder twice. I knew immediately I had been summoned. I followed 2 inmates across the housing unit, feeling the weight of every gaze burning into me. When we reached Big Dog's cell, the 2 men who had escorted me stepped back, as if unwilling to enter the lair of a predator. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. Big Dog sat against the wall, arms folded across his chest, watching me like an old wolf sizing up his prey. He was a massive man, his thick beard covering most of his scarred face, his body covered in tattoos. Some were Nazi symbols, others were cryptic markings that only members of the Aryan Brotherhood could decipher. But the most terrifying thing about him was not his size or his ink. It was his eyes. 2 hollow pits devoid of warmth, devoid of anything human. "I heard you were talking to them," he said, his voice low, dragging out the last word like an accusation. I knew exactly who he meant by them. I swallowed hard. I was just doing my job in the kitchen. Big Dog smirked, but there was no humor in it. "Oh yeah? And you think that gives you the right to betray your own kind?" The air in the room grew heavier. I realized this was not a warning. It was an ultimatum. I shook my head. "No." Big Dog tilted his head slightly, studying me for a long moment, as if weighing his next move. Then he spoke, his voice deep and deliberate. "You know the rule, right? If you don't follow, you won't last long." He did not yell, he did not make direct threats. I nodded. As I walked out of his cell, the inmates outside watched me with knowing expressions. Some were indifferent, some sneered, and some looked at me with cold calculation. I had already been flagged the moment I talked to Reggie. The moment I was summoned back to my cell, I knew something was wrong. The air felt heavier, thick with tension. I forced myself to walk normally, pretending I did not notice the shift in atmosphere, but the second I stepped inside, a fist collided with my face. My head snapped back, and before I could react, another blow crushed into my ribs, knocking the wind out of me. A third strike landed in my stomach, doubling me over. I tried to suck in a breath, but they did not give me the chance. More fists, more kicks, relentless, methodical. I barely had time to raise my arms before the real beating began. This was not a fight, it was a punishment. Boots slammed into my side, knees drove into my spine, knuckles cracked against my skull. I had no idea how many there were, only that they came from all directions, striking with a kind of precision that told me this had been planned. Later, I would learn that at least 10 members of the Aryan Brotherhood had jumped me that day. The pain blurred together into something indescribable. My vision swam, my ears rang, and the cold concrete beneath me vibrated with every impact. My blood, warm, thick, spread across the floor, seeping into my uniform. Then, suddenly, there was nothing. I did not know how long I was out. When I came to, I was no longer in my cell. Harsh fluorescent lights burned into my swollen, half-shut eyes. My entire body throbbed, jaw aching, ribs screaming, lungs struggling for air. Dried blood cracked along my lips as I tried to move, but a sharp, stabbing pain shot through my torso, forcing me to remain still. I was in the infirmary, lying on a stiff cot, barely breathing. A guard stood nearby, arms crossed, uninterested. A nurse worked over me, dabbing at my wounds with the detached efficiency of someone who had seen this 1,000 times before. She did not look at me when she muttered, "You're lucky they didn't kill you." Lucky. The word rang in my head, hollow and cruel. Lucky that they had stopped before stabbing me. Lucky that I had only been beaten unconscious. I would later learn that after they were finished, they had dragged my body into the hallway like garbage, leaving me there to bleed out. If a guard had not found me during his rounds, I would have died. And no one, no inmate, no officer, would have cared. From that moment on, I was a ghost, a dead. Every meal, every moment outside my cell, I could feel their eyes on me, waiting, watching. They had not killed me yet, but they would not hesitate to try again. The last 4 years of my sentence would not. From the day I left the infirmary, every single month, a new for me. Sometimes it was a quick, efficient beating, a few punches, a busted lip, maybe a cracked rib, just to remind me of my place. Other times it was drawn out and brutal, as if they wanted to see how much I could take before breaking. When I was assigned to work detail, I was given the worst jobs. Cleaning sewage, scrubbing toilets, dealing with rotten food in the kitchen, and the worst part? No one spoke to me. I did not just lose protection, I lost my voice. No white inmate acknowledged me. If I sat at a table, they got up. If I walked through a hallway, they parted like I was diseased. The black and Latino inmates knew I was marked, too. They may not have hated me, but they also knew that helping me meant making themselves a target. The real torture, however, was when store day came around. I had a small but steady stream of money from my father, enough to buy some food and necessities, but every single time I picked up my supplies, I was attacked immediately afterward. It did not matter where I hid, how quickly I tried to return to my cell, they always found me. The final straw came in early 2005, when I was ambushed before I even reached the commissary line. They did not just want to take my food, they wanted to beat me down for sport. That night I lay in my cell with 2 black eyes, a split lip, and a pain in my ribs that made breathing a struggle. And as I stared at the cracked ceiling, I realized I had to put an end to it. The next morning I wrote a letter to my father. I begged him to stop sending me money. I told him that every single cent he sent was just a reason for them to hurt me again. If I had nothing, maybe they would. With no money coming in, no food to steal, and nothing left to take from me, they lost interest. The beatings did not stop entirely, but they became less frequent, less severe. I was still an outcast, but at least I was no longer a target for their greed. But even then I was never safe. I knew the day would come when I would have to fight back, and when that day arrived, it would change everything. It happened during chow time in the mess hall, where the air was always thick with the scent of boiled food and unspoken violence. I had spent weeks crafting a makeshift shank, a sharpened toothbrush, melted down and reinforced. It was primitive, but it would do the job. I approached Big Dog from the side, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would rupture. He was mid-conversation with another AB member when I lunged. The shank sank into his gut, deep enough to make him collapse instantly. The entire room froze. No one, not even me, could believe what had just happened. The man who had ruled this place through fear and intimidation was now on his knees, clutching his stomach, bleeding out on the floor like an animal. I felt nothing. There was no satisfaction, no relief, just an icy emptiness as I stared down at the man gasping for breath beneath me. I had crossed a line, and I knew there was no turning back. The guards tackled me within seconds, throwing me to the ground with enough force to knock the wind out of pavement, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Around me, the prison yard erupted into shouts and movement, but it all felt so far away. I knew I was dying. And then, just like that, I was not there anymore. I hovered above my body, detached, watching the chaos below. Guards shouted orders, inmates backed away, some staring in eerie fascination. Blood pooled beneath me, dark and thick, soaking my uniform. But none of it mattered anymore. I was no longer there. I had heard stories of near-death experiences, people feeling peace as they left their bodies. I never believed them, but now I understood. There was no fear, no panic, no desire to return. My body felt like an old, discarded shell. The medics worked frantically, their voices muffled as if from another world. Someone pressed on my wound, another called for help, but it was pointless. I was already gone. Then I felt it, a pull, faint at first, then stronger, as if unseen hands were gripping my soul. My surroundings darkened, and suddenly I was no longer floating. I was falling. The prison vanished. The only thing left was darkness, not just absence of light, but a suffocating void. Then the sound began, distant at first, wailing, agonized cries, then closer. Screams of pure torment filled the air, layered with something worse, a grinding, gnashing sound, like bones crushed between unrelenting teeth. I heard snarling, chewing, tearing, as if creatures were feasting on something still alive. The pull became violent, dragging me downward. The free fall was unbearable, like being yanked into something monstrous. And then I hit the ground. The heat was instant, all-consuming. It wrapped around me like fire-laced chains. I gasped, but the air was thick, toxic, searing my lungs. Jagged rock cut into my skin, cracks spewing molten fire. Flames stretched endlessly, yet there was no light, only a choking red glow. And the screaming never stopped. It was a deafening symphony of suffering. My legs shook as I forced myself up. The heat was unbearable, hotter than anything I had ever known. My skin should have melted, but it didn't. The pain stayed, unrelenting. Then a voice cut through the agony. "Smooth, deep, amuse. Welcome home, Sam." The moment those words were spoken, the screams stopped. The air grew deathly still, and then came the laughter, low at first, then rising into a booming, bone-chilling cackle. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Who's there?" The laughter stopped. At a glance, he looked human, but every fiber of my being screamed that this was no man. His presence was suffocating, his black eyes bottomless voids that swallowed all light, reflecting nothing. No soul, no mercy. "This isn't real. This is just a dream. I don't belong here." Lucifer threw his head back and laughed. To my very slicing through the heat-choked air like a blade. "A good person?" His eyes gleamed as he lifted a single hand. "Let's see about that." The world around us twisted. Scenes from my life erupted into view, swirling like a living nightmare. These were not my proudest moments. These were the memories I had buried, the sins I had justified, the guilt I had ignored. I saw myself in 1993, gripping my father's gun, laughing as I pointed it at my best friend. Then his face. The terror in his eyes as my fingers squeezed the trigger, the deafening gunshot, the spray of blood, and me standing there, frozen, unmoving. "You killed your best friend," Lucifer's voice wove through the echoes of my past, "and you felt no remorse." But the next vision sent ice through my veins. I saw every fight I had started to avoid being a victim, every moment I stood by letting cruelty unfold, the hatred I had let fester, then the image that crushed me. I watched myself gripping a makeshift shank, driving it deep into the Aryan Brotherhood leader's gut. He collapsed, his blood pooling at my feet. I didn't flinch. I didn't feel disgust. Tears burned my eyes. I didn't have a choice. Lucifer chuckled, this time laced with something darker, something triumphant. "You had a choice, Sam, and you made the wrong one." The final vision appeared. My own thoughts, raw and unfiltered, the moment before I pulled the trigger in 1993. It would be crazy if the gun went off and actually hit him. Lucifer leaned in, his voice a silken whisper, cold as death. "Now tell me," he purred, "do you still think you're a good person?" Panic surged through me, a terror so consuming that my very essence seemed to tremble. My mind reeled as the weight of my sins crashed down upon me, their burden unbearable. "Oh God, Jesus, no, what have I done?" My voice, raw with desperation, echoed through the abyss. The moment his name left my lips, Lucifer let out an ear-splitting scream of agony. "Do not speak those names in my domain, murderer!" His voice thundered, shaking the very foundation of this wretched place. "They cannot save a lost soul like yours." His once calm demeanor was gone, replaced by uncontrollable rage. The ground beneath me trembled. The flames around us flared violently, and the tortured cries of the damned grew louder. I lifted my gaze, ignoring the infernal chaos around me, and with every ounce of strength I had left, I screamed. I begged God to hear me. I begged for mercy, for redemption, for salvation. I had spent my life making excuses, running from the truth, convincing myself that I was not beyond saving. And now, with nothing left, I finally understood that I had never been able to save myself. And then something shifted. A force unlike anything I had ever felt took hold of me. It was as if an unseen hand had grasped me by my very soul and yanked me upward with an unimaginable power. The darkness recoiled. Lucifer's face contorted in fury, his form flickering like a shadow desperately clinging to existence. His shrieks of rage filled the abyss, his words barely discernible through his monstrous howls. "It is not fair. He belongs to me." I did not know how long I was being pulled away, how far I ascended, or where exactly I was going. All I knew was that the fire, the torment, the despair, it all faded into the distance, as if I were escaping from a prison I had unknowingly sentenced myself to. And then, suddenly, I was no longer surrounded by fire, drowning in anguish, falling endlessly into a pit of damnation. Instead, I was standing before someone. I recognized him instantly, though it had been so many years since I had last seen his face. He looked just as I remembered, young, full of warmth, his expression gentle yet filled with something even deeper than kindness. It was Danny, my best friend, the friend whose life I had taken. My knees buckled as a tidal wave of grief crashed over me. Sobs tore from my throat as I collapsed before him. "Danny, I'm sorry." My body shook with uncontrollable sorrow, my guilt an unbearable weight pressing down on me. Danny did not say a word, but his smile, his expression, it told me everything. He already knew, and more importantly, he had already forgiven me. A voice, calm yet filled with absolute authority, resonated within my mind. "It is time to go back." I recoiled. "No, please, don't send me back to hell." Danny's gaze held mine, and though he did not speak aloud, I heard his words as clearly as if he had whispered them directly into my soul. "You are not going back there. God has heard you. He has forgiven you, and so have I. But your time on earth is not yet over. You still have a purpose to fulfill." Before I could comprehend what was happening, I felt it again, a sudden, uncontrollable pull. But this time, I was not being dragged down into the abyss. I was being sent back. Tears still streamed down my face. The only thing I knew was that I was heading straight for something familiar, something inevitable. Then, with a forceful impact, I crashed into my own body. The pain was instantaneous. A scorching, unbearable agony spread through me like fire, consuming every nerve in my being. My lungs convulsed, gasping for air as I felt my chest rise with an involuntary inhale. My eyes flew open, but everything was white, blinding. For a moment, I thought I had failed, that I was still trapped somewhere between life and death. And then, a piercing scream, shrill and filled with utter terror. I barely managed to move my aching head when I saw her, a nurse, her face pale as a sheet, eyes wide with horror. Before I could say a word, she collapsed onto the cold tile floor, unconscious. The next thing I knew, a group of doctors and nurses burst into the room, their faces frozen in shock. One of them, an older man with graying hair, stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly as he stared at me like he had just seen a ghost. "You were dead," he finally muttered. Whisper, "Your heart stopped. You had lost too much blood. There was no way you could have survived this." I could only sit there, my body still weak, my mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. I had been dead and still alive. It was not until much later that I began to piece together the truth about what had happened while I was gone. The weapon that had nearly killed me, it was not something that should have been in the prison. Someone had smuggled it in. Someone had wanted me dead. The investigation led nowhere. No one could or would identify the guard responsible for allowing such a weapon to enter the prison. It was as if my attacker had been given a free pass, an invisible hand guiding the events that had nearly ended my life. But deep down, I had my suspicions. I knew the truth, even if I could never prove it. I knew exactly who had set this up, and though I was alive, I was not safe. I spent the final months of my sentence recovering in the prison infirmary. My body was weak, but my mind was shattered. I had seen the depths of hell, felt its fire, heard the screams of the damned, and yet I was still here. I should not have survived, but I did. That alone was proof enough that God had pulled me back from eternal suffering. Some would call it luck. Others would say I was just another ex-con with a wild story, but I had nothing to prove. The jagged scar running across my stomach was proof enough. It was the mark of a blade meant to send me straight to hell, and the only reason I was still breathing was because Jesus himself had saved me. If there is one thing I learned from my time in hell, it is this: most souls remain trapped there not because they were abandoned, but because they abandoned God. They had convinced themselves they did not need him, that they were beyond saving, and worst of all, some refused to ask for help. Pride is a dangerous thing. I saw it firsthand. The souls who could not let go of their arrogance, who refused to acknowledge their need for forgiveness, were the ones who stayed in darkness forever. I was moments away from joining them. If I had hesitated even a second longer, if I had not cried out to Jesus, I would have been lost. When my release date came, I walked out of that prison a free man. But I was not the same man who had entered. The weight of my past clung to me like a shadow. Every day I carried the shame of what I had done, not just in prison, but before. I had taken a life, I had hurt people, I had been someone I no longer recognized. But every day I healed a little more. That did not mean my past had forgotten me. Once you become an enemy of the Aryan Brotherhood, you are marked for life. Even outside those prison walls, I knew I had to watch my back. I stayed aware of every face, every unfamiliar glance. Maybe they had moved on, maybe not. But I was not going to make the mistake of thinking I was truly safe. Despite everything, I found my way back to faith. I rebuilt my life, not because I thought I could erase my past, but because I knew it was the only way forward. I prayed, not just for myself, but for those still lost. This is my story. Now I ask you, do you believe I was truly saved, or was Lucifer playing a trick on me? Thank you, Eternal Bible Stories, for giving me the courage to share this. And to those listening, may God bless you, and never forget, no matter how far you have fallen, if you call out to him, Jesus can still save you.